Now I'll put on a different hat and introduce our speaker. It's a real pleasure to introduce Donna. Donna's one of my favorite people around, and I first met her a while ago in the parking lot of the Big Tree Trail in Prairie Creek State Park, where Jenny Hansen was leading a nature walk. And Donna and I were on this walk. And I remember we saw the flowers of the hazelnut, which was a first for me. And Donna has always pointed those out and loves them. And that was where I met Jenny also, who I'm really glad I met too. So since that meeting, Donna has done a lot of teaching at CR. She did 9 years, well, in the ag department. She taught plant ID for 9 years and taught landscape design. So she has some very relevant knowledge and skills. And she's generously shared these with our chapter. She's also a voracious, fast reader, so she keeps me informed on important things. And she was the first person to tell me about Douglas Tallamy's first book called Bringing Nature Home. And I might not have picked up on it the first time she told me, so she kept prodding, and eventually I got how important this message was. And I think we've done a pretty good job of spreading the Tallamy message to our membership at this point. But we'll keep bringing it up. And then, and Donna has helped our chapter in a lot of different ways through the nursery and through our plant consultations, and doing things like helping build our planting guide, which is you can find on our native plant gardening webpage. And she's spoken to our chapter several times about other flower adventures. And I know for tonight's Zoom program, Donna had to learn some new skills, and she even had to get some new equipment, but she did, and she's here ready to share her latest wildflower travels with us. Thank you, Donna, for taking us away.
Thank you, Carol, so much. I'm going to go ahead and screen share now, and then I'll get started. Okay, thank you all for showing up to watch these slides. I'm looking forward to sharing them with you. This trip happened, thank goodness, last year when we didn't have any travel restrictions. And like many things in my life, this trip started with a book. There's a book at the library that's called Wildflower Wonders, the 50 Best Wildflower Sites in the World. So I'm looking through this book and I'm reading their description of Mount Rainier wildflowers, which they describe as, quote, possibly the most flowery place on the planet. Well, I read that and I thought, wow, really? The most flowery place on the planet? I gotta see it. And it was interesting because I had never been to Mount Rainier before, and I hadn't heard people talking about that as a good spot for wildflowers. So I was intrigued. And I contacted my friend Kathy Dilley. Some of you may remember her from her time here in Arcata. She was also very active in propagating native plants. And she has since moved on to Utah, where she is the manager of the native plant nursery at Zion National Park. Great job for Kathy. I had hoped she could join us here tonight on the Zoom, but she's not going to be able to do that. But I'll just say, starting out, that the pictures I'm going to show you are a mix. I took some, Kathy took some. Kathy has a better camera, she's a better photographer, so most of the really good close-up pictures are the ones that Kathy took. So our plan was that I would drive to Portland, Kathy would fly into Portland, and we'd meet there and then proceed up to Mount Rainier. Okay, trying to get the next slide up here. Now, we're all tired of the smoke. It's been a very weird twilight zone day, and most of the other slides have nice blue sky. But this is a picture I took on my way to Portland, and it's at the $8 Mountain Botanical Area. That's maybe 10 miles north of the Oregon border on Highway 199. It's just off the road there. Some of you may have been there. If you haven't, it's a really good place. They have a nice boardwalk, which you can see in the corner here, that goes out over this Darlingtonia seep. And you can see all the Darlingtonia mixed in this area. There was also masses of Western azalea here. And since it was the end of July, the azalea had been bloomed out. But if you got here earlier in spring, it would be a lovely sight. Now, what you're seeing in the background here is wildfire smoke. Some of you may remember there was a wildfire just off of I-5 up above, well, on the way between the Oregon border and up to Portland. There was a wildfire, and so there was quite a lot of smoke there. Okay, this is in Portland. Kathy and I spent a day there visiting both the Chinese garden and the Japanese garden. And this is a picture at the Portland Japanese garden with our lovely vine maple, just beginning to show some of its really nice fall color. So again, if you're up in Portland, it's really worth a visit to the Portland Japanese garden, where it's built on the side of a hillside where there are quite a lot of other native plants also. So when we left Portland, instead of driving straight up I-5 to Mount Rainier National Park, we drove on the back roads. And here we stopped because there was a very dramatic view of the backside of Mount St. Helens with some fireweed here in the foreground. This is the first picture at Mount Rainier. A little bit of background. Mount Rainier is 14,411 feet, which is just a little bit shorter than Mount Whitney, which is 14,505 feet. We spent 2 days at the park. We did not attempt to climb the mountain. We were mostly interested in seeing as many flowers as we could, and we saw a lot. The first day we went into an entrance on the east side of the park called Sunrise. This is at an elevation of 6,400 feet. The second day we went in at one of the main entrances on the south side of the park, the Paradise entry, a little lower elevation, 5,400 feet. So what we primarily were walking through was what's called the subalpine environment. And there's a lot of challenges in this environment to plant growth. First of all, there's a very short and cool growing season. The snowpack here is generally from 15 to 20 feet deep. So lots of snow, and this snow is much wetter than snow that falls further inland, because this is where the moisture bumps up against the mountains and dumps this very wet snow, which means that it takes longer to melt than it does on the other side of the mountain. So it's a very short growing season. The soil that the plants are growing in is primarily volcanic soil with very minimal amounts of humus. There are very strong winds, which tend to desiccate the plants. And there's also very intense sunlight and ultraviolet radiation. So given these challenges and constraints, it's even more amazing to see such a profusion of flowers. This one here is showy Jacob's ladder, Polemonium pulcherima. And here we have subalpine daisy, Erigeron peregrinus. Kathy managed to get a nice picture of a butterfly on top of that subalpine daisy. So here's a little grouping of flowers that you could see there. The lupine, which is broadleaf lupine. A daisy, I'm not sure of the identification of that one. And a slender paintbrush, which is Castanea miniata. We saw two basic species of paintbrush in the park. You'll see the other one later on. This is a nice specimen of tall bluebells, Vertensia paniculata. This is the only one we saw, but really nice example. So here's me and Kathy with the mountain in the background. And what we're looking at here is the Emmons Glacier. And here is where it's actually melting. And you can see the water flowing down out of the glacier. At first, it was hard for me to recognize this because this doesn't really look like a glacier. It's not white, it's fairly dirty. But anyway, that is the terminus of the glacier, and it's coming down here. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say about the Emmons Glacier, this is the largest American glacier outside of Alaska. Also, there was an American poet named Marianne Moore. She climbed Mount Rainier in 1922 and wrote a poem about the mountain. And she talked about, she described the mountain as having an octopus of ice, describing how the top of the mountain is covered with glaciers that radiate off the sides. So I thought that was a really nice way of thinking about it, an octopus of ice. This is a small flowered Penstemon, Penstemon Procerus. And here's two pictures of the pasque flower seed head, sort of a typical seed head for the ranunculus family plants. This is Anemone Occidentalis. Here's another example of the profusion of flowers you could see in the meadows here. This one here is Sitka valerian, and there was quite a lot of that scattered throughout the park. This is the other paintbrush, the magenta paintbrush, Castanea parviflora. More lupine here in the background. And this might be arnica, I'm not sure. And another view similar. And here you see our first Laoswart, Pedicularis. This is Particularis Bracteosa. And I'd like to say a few words about these Laoswart plants. We saw 5 species of Laoswarts. at the park. Worldwide, there are 800 species of these plants. 11 of them are known to grow here in California. Pedicularis used to be in the Scrophulariaceae family, but fairly recently it was moved into the Orobanchaceae or broom rape family. It was moved in there along with paintbrush, owl's clover, and Triphysaria. So those plants are all now in the broom rape family. Before this move, the plants in the broom rape family were all 100% parasitic plants. However, these that had been moved into that family, including the Pedicularis, they are considered to be half parasitic or hemiparasitic. I find them very interesting because the flowers have unusual shapes and because the plants have interesting common names. So here's a picture of the towering Laoswart, and then here is one that we usually call bull elephant's head. And here's a closer shot of that. So if you look, you can see it looks like elephant ears and it looks like an elephant's trunk. I found out that it also has another common name in other parts of the country. It's called the butterfly's tongue Laoswart. So Pedicularis groenlandica, which is one I've seen growing in our region also. Now this one has 4 different common names. It's sometimes called parrot's beak, or it's called ram's horn, or it's called sickle top, or it's just called leafy Laoswart. And that is Particularis Racimosa. And this is the towering Laoswart, Pedicularis Bracteosa. And the leaves. This one is called the coiled beak Laoswart. And there's a close-up. And finally, we have the bird's beak Laoswart, Pedicularis Ornithoreica. And you can see this one has reddish stems. So, as I said, these flowers are interesting to me, and I tried to do a little bit of research, and one source said that each flower shape fits a particular insect or hummingbird pollinator. I didn't do a lot of research, but I did find one study from 1970 called the Pollination Ecology of Pedicularis in Colorado, where they studied 7 different species, including 3 of the ones we observed at Mount Rainier. This study concluded that these plants do not self-pollinate, and the only insects observed foraging in the Pedicularis flowers were various species of bumblebees. The researchers on this study differentiated between pollination by bumblebee queens and bumblebee workers. Interesting, because I certainly didn't know this, but the bumblebee queens have longer tongues than the workers. And so they tend to go after the flowers that offer both nectar and pollen. Whereas a Pedicularis species that don't offer nectar and that have relatively short corolla tubes, and this would be Pedicularis groenlandica and Pedicularis racimosa, were pollinated almost exclusively by worker bumblebees who have the shorter tongues. So there's a little bit of information on how these flower shapes might be influencing pollinators. Okay, here's a nice stand of bear grass. You know, I always enjoy on these trips, I always enjoy seeing new flowers, and I always enjoy seeing familiar flowers that I've seen before. So certainly seeing bear grass up here. And this is a dwarf lupin, Lupinus lepidus, variety Labii. And there's a close-up. You can see that this plant is densely covered with hairs, which is one of the adaptations a lot of these subalpine plants have to conserve moisture from these drying winds, and also protect the plants from intense sunlight. There was a lot of heather growing on the mountainside. This is pink mountain heather. I don't know how to pronounce this genus. Phyllodoce is my guess. Empetriformis. And there's a close-up. You can see the leaves and the flowers there. So here's a larger landscape view. Probably a lot of this purple here is lupin. And I also wanted to point out the trees. Kathy and I didn't spend a lot of time trying to identify the trees, but as you can see, a lot of them was the same species. And we did find out what that was. This is subalpine fir, Abies laciocarpa. Here's a nice example of the Scarlet Paintbrush, Cattleya miniata. And another view of some of the real flowery areas that we enjoyed. So here you've got paintbrush and lupin and Columbia lily. Kathy got a nice shot of the lily. This is a rose family plant, Sitka mountain ash, Sorbus sitchensis. And from some information on the park website, they mentioned that you can tell in general the depth of the snowpack by how tall these plants are, because these plants don't generally grow taller than the snowpack. It's too cold out there. The other thing that they mentioned about this plant is that the berries ferment in winter under the under the snowpack. And the birds get a little crazy in spring when the snow melts, and they eat these fermented berries. So here's another of the common heathers up there. This is white mountain heather. It's in a different genus, Cassiope. Species is Mertensiana. And this is said to be John Muir's favorite flower. Now here's an example of the landscape. Kathy and I started talking about how you could rate a trail by WPM, wows per minute. And I'm telling you, between the landscape and the mountains and the flowers, there were a lot of wows per minute. In this picture, you can also see this very distinctive narrow profile of the subalpine fir. This is another thing that's adapted to this environment in terms of making it easy to shed snow, because there aren't a lot of long horizontal branches that could get weighted down by the snow. This is looking down at the Sunrise Visitor Center. And here's another flowery meadow scene with Lupine, Paintbrush, and it looks like some more heather. This is a picture of a Veronica. Don't know what species it is. There were 4, 5, 6 different species of Veronica in the park, and we didn't really take the time to carefully identify them. But I wanted to have at least one picture of Veronica just to remind me that we did see a lot of it there. Now this is a plant that I really got excited about once we figured out what it was. The common name is Partridge Foot. The botanical name is Luetkia Pectineda. And I had never seen it before, but years ago I read The Spirit of the Siskiyous book about Mary Petzel, who was sort of a rogue botanist up in the Siskiyou Mountains and the Kalmiopsis wilderness. And this was one of her favorite plants. And I remember reading about it in that book and hoping that I would get a chance to see it someday. And here it was, another rose family plant. There's a close-up of the flowers. And there's the leaves, very distinctive, interesting foliage. So here we have some Rosy Spirea, another rose family plant. Botanical name Spirea densiflora. Really beautiful color. This is Alpine Aster, Aster alpigenus. And just to give you an idea of the scale, this is a very small plant. Here's Kathy's foot next to the aster. Another view of the mountains and predominantly the subalpine fir. So this is cushion buckwheat, Eriogonum ovalifolium. The next two shots are Agoceras. We think it's probably the orange Agoceras. Not sure on that one. You can see it's just got a halo of fine hairs. Here's some more of that white mountain heather. In this shot, it's actually growing down a little bank. And you can see that the leaves on this heather are quite different than on the pink mountain heather. We also saw a fair amount of wildlife there. So here's a marmot, and over on the right-hand side, you can see a little squirrel or chipmunk, ground squirrel. Another view of the marmot climbing over these rocks. Kathy managed to snap a picture of the marmot sticking its tongue out. So this is a clump of avalanche lilies. We were here on August 1st and August 2nd, and the snow in some places had just melted, because that's when you're going to see these avalanche lilies. The botanical name is Erythronium montanum. And this is an interesting plant that can actually combust starch in the stem as it's buried under the snow. It can combust starch in the stem and melt a hole in the snow so it can get out into the sun and start photosynthesizing. And this increased temperatures inside the stem of the plant also enables it to begin photosynthesis earlier. So pretty clever. Really beautiful flowers. Kathy got some great close-up shots. Another example of wildlife, I believe this is a sooty grouse. It was just sitting on this rock next to the trail. So here's looking at the mountain. You can see a waterfall here. Looks like there's more waterfalls coming off some of these other snowbanks in the background. Very rugged, interesting landscape. Again, the silhouettes of these subalpine firs. Here's another marmot that we encountered a little ways down the trail in a field of lupin, and it was just having a really good time eating this lupin, just taking big mouthfuls of it. Another typical meadow scene. You can see there's still snow up here, not that much higher. So lots of flowers here. And always the mountain. There were a fair number of people there. This park can get very crowded. So the recommendation is don't go on a weekend, because remember, it's pretty close to the Seattle area. So don't go on a weekend, and try to get up there first thing in the morning before the parking lots fill up. And as you can see, we had generally beautiful weather the 2 days we were there. The day we left, they were predicting a possibility of snow showers. So again, just the incredible floral profusion against that amazing rugged landscape. So here we've got a lot of bistort, and we've got paintbrush, and probably some more Sitka valerian, a little bit of corn lilies. We saw quite a lot of corn lilies, but I don't remember that we saw any in bloom. Nice close-up of the Scarlet Paintbrush. Some more of the Laoswart here. So this is probably the towering Laoswart, and I'm guessing that that in the background is the bull elephant's head. So we just saw lots and lots of lupin. And here's a little bit of shooting star and some more pink heather. More lupin. This is one of the native white rhododendrons, Rhododendron albiflorum, which was interesting to see. Never seen that one before. And at one point we came to a spot on the trail where there was a little water seep, and there were several saxifrage family plants blooming there. I believe this is Brewer's Bishop Cap, Mitella breweri. It has the seeds in these little cup-shaped things. This one, we're not sure. We think it's either Saxifraga mertensiana or Micranthes odontaloma. Could not good enough photograph to really tell, but it is interesting for the really regular pronounced teeth on the leaf lobes. These next two, again, we're not 100% sure. Our best guess is rusty saxifrage, Micranthes ferruginea. And here's shooting star. This is Jeffrey's shooting star, Primula jeffreyi. You can really see, I think, in this picture, why one of the common names for shooting stars is mosquito bill. So the next few pictures, we encountered a volunteer ranger who was roaming around on the trails, and we were talking plants with her, and she told us to keep our eye out for this particular plant, which she said was the only specimen in the park, and she identified it as Sebaldia Procumbens. So we got several pictures. There's the overall plant, a little more close-up of the flower. And when I got home and looked in my guidebook, it just didn't look like Sebaldia. So I actually sent these pictures up to Mount Rainier and asked them to help me identify it. And they identified it as Davis's knotweed, also called Newberry's fleece flower. And the botanical name is Anemone Occidentalis. Really pretty monkey flower, Lewis's monkey flower, Erythranthri lewisii. And gentians. So this is mountain bog gentian, Gentiana calicosa. And you'll notice that the interior part of the flower is very light white colored or almost transparent. And I read up a little bit on it, and that is so that insects that may pollinate the plant are more likely to go down if they can see light in the flower. If it's all dark down there, they might be intimidated and not get in there and do what they need to do. Here's a view of the surrounding mountains and some of the trails. They have quite a system of trails, and interestingly, many of the trails are paved. And I'm not sure, my guess is that that makes the trail stand up better to the snowpacks. So more lupin. You know, I noticed on these pictures, just when I was going through them earlier today, that there's this real delineation here where all the trees are much shorter than the trees in the background, which made me wonder if maybe this had been an avalanche zone and all these things were just coming back. You can see that here too. Here's another patch of avalanche lilies that we ran across. There weren't a lot of them. I guess the snow had been gone for long enough that most of the avalanche lilies had come and gone. Some colorful mushrooms. This is the Nisqually Glacier. And again, you can see it's melting right here and running down here. So one of the many glaciers on the mountain. Very dramatic terrain. Here we have arrowleaf groundsel, Senecio triangularis, and broadleaf arnica, Arnica latifolia. More lupine and arnica. Nice combination of colors. Close up on the lupine. And another plant combination, the corn lilies, bistort, and lupine. Now this looks like, at least at first glance, strawberries, but it's not. It is the dwarf bramble, or Rubus lasiococcus, and Kathy got a great photo close-up of the flowers. Quite sweet. So that's the dwarf bramble or creeping raspberry. All right, this is for Carol, because we saw quite a lot of the carrot family plants, and we weren't paying a lot of attention. And on our last hike at Mount Rainier, I said we've got to get a picture of an Apiaceae for Carol. So here we go, Gray's lovage, Ligusticum grayi. It's really actually pretty. And there's the leaves. And that is the last photo from Mount Rainier. And now we're leaving the park and heading southeast to Yakima. And we saw this nice specimen of goat's beard up against this interesting rock cliff. I really like goat's beard. I grow it in my yard. And I'm always happy to see it out in the wild. So Kathy and I drove a little ways out of the park on the way to Yakima and stopped for a brief hike next to a creek and saw this one-sided wintergreen, Orthilia secunda, and western prince's pine, Camophila umbellata, and just in the parking lot, we saw this Silene, and I got pretty excited, and Kathy got a really nice up-close picture. But it turned out that even though this is in a relatively wild area, it is a non-native Silene that's actually native to Europe, Silene vulgaris. However, close to it was a wonderful patch of our native twin flower, Linnea borealis. Always a treat to see these flowers. And this was a good sized patch. So I dropped Kathy off at the car rental place in Yakima. She was heading north to Seattle, and I kept going southeast. And a few days later, I spent a day at the High Desert Museum just south of Bend, Oregon. If any of you ever have the chance to visit this museum, I would highly recommend it. I spent almost an entire day there. One thing I really appreciated about this museum is they have art everywhere. Art inside, art outside. So here's an interesting sculpture of a salmon. And here's elk, deer. And here's some of our hardhack, Spirea douglasii. Nice to see it growing there. Here's an example of the art that they had. I was wandering around outside and I heard this music, and I'm looking around and I see a speaker up in this pine tree. And then I saw this plaque that interpreted what was going on there. So the musician, Dana Reason, worked with Oregon State University scientists that provided the data for the project. So it says this two-site sound installation features a sonic interpretation of scientific data. It's an invitation to listen to the sound of water moving inside a ponderosa pine tree. So that's why it's called She Breathes Water. I thought that was really interesting. Big pine drops, Pterospora andromeda. Several of these on some of the trails outside. And I love this this sign, made me really laugh. So from the museum, I drove further south on Highway 395 to the Newberry Volcanic National Monument, which is another very interesting monument. Oh, here I'm still back at the High Desert Museum. This was one of the exhibits they had inside Desert Reflections, Water Shapes the West. And they had a whole display about the dam controversy in our Klamath Basin. Okay, now I'm at the Newberry Volcanic National Monument, and this is a fairly large monument with a number of campsites, 2 resort lodges, quite a few trails. And I took 2 trails there. The first one is called the Obsidian Flow Trail, and that's where this is, and you can see the obsidian. And growing right out of the rock is this Silene, which I think is Silene douglasii. The other trail I took was called the Cinder Hill Trail. And along the trail, I saw quite a lot of this dainty little white flowered plant, which turns out to be Nuttall's Linanthus, Linanthus Nuttallii. Really shows up against the duff along the trail. So when I got to the top of the trail, there was this big lava scree slope, and sliding around on the scree slope, I saw this little plant, which is dwarf alpine gold, Hulcianana. Aster family, you can see these interesting leaves, and they're very hairy. Dwarf alpine gold. And also dwarf monkey flower. And these are really dwarf, just an inch or 2 tall. So that's Erythranthinana. And from the trail, you had a great view of East Lake. There are 2 different lakes in the, excuse me. There's 2 different lakes in the caldera. And this is East Lake. I forget the other name, the name of the other lake. Okay, last stop is Scott Valley. And I was driving around Scott Valley and saw these flowers blooming along one of the ranch fence posts. And that's our native clematis, Virgin's Bower, Clematis ligusticifolia. And here's the characteristic Ranuncula family seed heads. And my last stop was Scott Mountain Summit Meadow, one of my very favorite places. This was by now sort of the middle of August, but there wasn't anyone around. I spent about an hour wandering around the meadow, enjoying the peace and quiet and the flowers. And here's my last shot, which is again the gentian calicosa. Beautiful blue color and interesting flower buds. So always a treat to see this plant. And that's it. I'm gonna get out of the share mode. Okay. Anyone have questions? I'd be happy to try to give you an answer.
So I'm looking through the chat during the presentation to see what questions there were, but please keep asking, typing them in the chat box. Someone asked, can twin flower grow here on the coast, Linnea borealis?
I have seen it growing quite nicely in Bayside. Judy Hinman got a stand established. I haven't been there for a few years, but it was growing in Bayside. Does anyone else have, does anyone else have any observations of the twin flower growing here? Are we growing it at our nursery? Who knows?
Carol said, thanks for the lovage.
I know, she's welcome. Ah. So did you get that, Andrea? Carol said there's a bunch of twin flower growing at Lamfair.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
All right, any other comments, questions?
I could really understand your wows per minute. It was really beautiful walking with you and your slides.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, I'm just so grateful. We were not even thinking about it. It's just like, hey, let's go up to Mount Rainier, and I'm glad we did it last year.
Right. Oh, Jenny would like to speak. See if we can unmute you, Jenny.
I can do it, yeah. Hi, Donna. Thank you.
Hey, Jenny.
Super. And boy, does it bring back memories of Mount Rainier. I spent a lot of time there. So just enjoy it while it's there, because it is a very warm mountain, and it's likely to disappear in an avalanche and a landslide any minute sometime. So it's gorgeous pictures, and you know, I fell in love with the wildflowers when I was there. So it's just lovely to have you do that again. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yes, Donna, I'll speak up. Thank you. That was a great trip.
That
And
was a great trip. Thank you, Carol.
yeah. Well, everybody is welcome to come back next month for more wonderful flower pictures, very different from Donna's and Kathy's. But we have the two professional conservation photographers, Badger and, let's see, I'm forgetting their names right now, but it's somebody Badger and Anita Waters.
Wolf. Rob
Waters.
Badger and Nita Wolf.
Wolf. Oh, okay. Yeah. And they give a good show. They've given it to several other chapters, so I saw it and I won't mind seeing it again. So thank you, Donna, and thank you, Andrea, for hosting and managing the things. I can see Karen is clapping. Yeah, round of applause. Thunderous applause.
Thanks, folks. My pleasure.
Oh, look, some people know how to make an applause on their little boxes. Yeah.
All right, are we going to leave?
Okay, we'll say good night. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
And when Andrea leaves, then we all leave.